Mark Reynolds thought he had just made the smartest move of his life. He looked at his wife, Ella, a woman he saw as nothing more than a plain, unambitious waitress, and kicked her out of their apartment to make room for his wealthy new mistress. He told her she wasn't corporate material. He told her she was holding him back from his rise to the top of Vanguard Global. He had no idea that the ink on those divorce papers didn't just end a marriage. It signed his death warrant in the business world. Because Mark didn't know the truth. That waitress he just humiliated? She wasn't just corporate material. She was the secret majority shareholder of the very company he worked for. And the board meeting the next morning was going to be a bloodbath. The meatloaf was cold. That was the first thing Mark Reynolds noticed when he walked into the small, two-bedroom apartment in Queens. It wasn't the fact that his wife, Ella, had been on her feet for 10 hours. It wasn't the welcoming smile she offered him. It was the temperature of the ground beef. "I work 12 hours at Vanguard," Mark muttered, loosening his tie and tossing his briefcase onto the cheap IKEA sofa. "I handle accounts worth millions. Is it too much to ask for a hot meal?" Ella Vance, or Ella Reynolds, for a few more hours, didn't flinch. She simply picked up the plate and walked to the microwave. She was 26, with striking green eyes usually hidden behind thick glasses and hair tied back in a messy bun. To Mark, and to the world, she was a nobody. A waitress at a diner on 4th Street, a woman he had married 3 years ago because she was safe and manageable. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said softly. "The shift ran late. Old Mr. Henderson had a seizure in booth 4. "Always the excuses," Mark scoffed, scrolling through his phone. "You need to understand, Ella. Things are changing. Big things. I had a meeting with Director Silas today. They're looking for a new vice president of operations." Ella set the reheating timer. "That's wonderful, Mark. You've worked hard for it." "I have. But the VP role, it requires a certain image, a certain lifestyle." He looked around the apartment with disdain. "Silas invited me to the Founders Gala this weekend. It's at the Pierre Hotel. Black tie. The rumor is the ghost owner is finally going to reveal themselves." Ella's hand paused on the microwave door. "The ghost owner?" "Yeah. The mystery billionaire who bought out the company 5 years ago. Nobody knows who it is. Some say it's an oil tycoon from Texas. Others say it's European royalty. All we know is that they own 51% of the stock and they're coming to clean house." Mark laughed, a cruel, arrogant sound. "I plan to be on their good side. I need to look the part, single, sharp, or paired with someone who fits the aesthetic." Ella turned around, leaning against the counter. Her expression was unreadable. "And you don't think I fit the aesthetic?" Mark looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. He saw the stained apron, the tired eyes, the lack of designer jewelry. "Ella, look at you. You smell like diner coffee and grease. The women at this gala wear dresses that cost more than your annual salary. I need a partner who can talk about the market, not the lunch special." He stood up, walking past her to the bedroom. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. I need to focus. Don't wake me up when you leave for your job." Ella waited until the door clicked shut. The submissive posture vanished instantly. She straightened her spine, her eyes turning cold and sharp. She reached into the pocket of her apron, bypassing her cracked iPhone 8, and pulled out a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. She dialed a single number. "Miss Vance?" The voice on the other end was crisp. It was Arthur Sterling, the acting CEO of Vanguard Global. "Arthur," Ella said, her voice dropping an octave, commanding and precise. "Is the gala preparation finalized?" "Yes, ma'am. Everything is set for Saturday. The board is anxious to meet you. Rumors are circulating." "Let them circulate," Ella said, glancing at the closed bedroom door. "And Arthur?" "Add a name to the termination review list for Monday morning." "Who, ma'am?" "Mark Reynolds, Senior Account Manager." "Your husband, ma'am?" Arthur sounded hesitant. "Soon-to-be ex-husband," Ella corrected. "And Arthur? Ensure Jessica Thorne is invited to the gala." I want her there when I walk in." "Understood." Ella hung up and looked at the cold meatloaf. She dumped it in the trash. The charade was over. The next evening, the tension in the apartment was thick enough to choke on. Mark had come home early, which was unusual. Even more unusual was the woman standing next to him. She was tall, blonde, and wearing a red dress that was a little too tight for a Tuesday. Ella recognized her immediately from Mark's work stories. Jessica Thorne, an intern who had slept her way into a junior assistant role. Ella was sitting at the kitchen table, paying bills. She didn't stand up. "Mark?" she asked calmly. "Who is this?" "This is Jessica," Mark said, puffing out his chest. He threw a heavy manila envelope onto the table, right on top of the electric bill. "And these are divorce papers." Ella looked at the envelope, then at Jessica, who was smirking, examining her fingernails as if the apartment was beneath her dignity. "You're bringing her here?" Ella asked. "Jessica understands me," Mark said, his voice loud, rehearsed. "She works at Vanguard. She knows the pressure. She knows the players. We're going to the gala together on Saturday, as a power couple. I can't walk into that room with a waitress, Ella. It's career suicide." "So you're kicking me out?" "The lease is in my name." Mark lied. It wasn't. Ella had paid for the apartment in cash under a shell company to maintain her cover, but she let him believe he was the provider. "I need you packed and gone by tonight. Jessica is moving in." Jessica stepped forward, her voice high and nasal. "Don't worry, sweetie. You can keep the pots and pans. Mark says you're good at cooking. Maybe you can find a nice truck driver to settle down with." Mark laughed. "Exactly. Look, Ella, I'm not a monster. There's a check in there for $5,000. Consider it severance pay for 3 years of whatever this was." Ella stood up slowly. She picked up the envelope. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply opened it, took out a pen from her pocket, and signed the papers on the spot. Mark blinked, stunned. He had expected begging. He had expected a scene. You're just signing it?" "You want a divorce, Mark? You have one," Ella said. She tore the check for $5,000 into tiny pieces and let them flutter to the floor like snow. "I don't need your money," she said quietly. "Don't act high and mighty," Jessica snapped. "That's $5,000. That's probably 6 months of tips for you." Ella walked to the bedroom, grabbed a single duffel bag she had already packed that morning, and walked back to the door. She paused, her hand on the knob. She looked back at the husband who had just discarded her like trash, and the mistress who thought she had won the lottery. "Enjoy the gala, Mark," Ella said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "I hear the reveal of the owner is going to be shocking. Make sure you wear your best suit." "I always do," Mark sneered. "Get out." Ella walked out into the cool New York night. A black Lincoln Navigator with tinted windows pulled up to the curb immediately. A driver in a full suit stepped out and opened the door. "To the penthouse, Miss Vance?" the driver asked. "Yes, James," Ella said, sliding into the leather interior that smelled of expensive cologne and power. "And call the stylists. I need a dress for Saturday. I want to look like I own the place." "Because you do, ma'am," James replied, closing the door. Back in the apartment, Mark popped a bottle of champagne. "I told you it would be easy," he told Jessica. "She knows her place. Now, let's focus on Saturday. Once I charm the new owner, I'll be running the division within a month." Jessica giggled, clinking her glass against his. "To us! To the top!" They had no clue they were toasting to their own funeral. Saturday night. The Pierre Hotel Grand Ballroom. The atmosphere was electric. The creme de la creme of the New York business world had gathered under the massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of caviar and champagne. Mark Reynolds felt like a king. He was wearing a rented Armani tuxedo that fit him perfectly. On his arm, Jessica wore a shimmering gold dress that screamed for attention. They moved through the crowd, Mark shaking hands with executives he desperately wanted to impress. "There's Director Silas," Mark whispered, nudging Jessica. He steered her toward a gray-haired man near the bar. "Director," Mark beamed. "Good to see you." Silas looked at Mark, then at Jessica. He frowned slightly. "Reynolds, I didn't expect. I thought your wife was coming?" Mark waved his hand dismissively. Change of plans, Director. Jessica here is part of the Vanguard family, marketing division. We felt it was better to keep things aligned. Silas narrowed his eyes. Aligned. Right. Well, behave yourself tonight, Reynolds. The chairwoman is extremely particular about company ethics. Chairwoman? Mark asked. I thought nobody knew who it was. We didn't. Silas lowered his voice. But the legal team was briefed an hour ago. It's a woman. And apparently she's been watching the company from the ground up for years. She knows everything. A chill ran down Mark's spine, but he shook it off. Well, she'll see my numbers. Highest sales in the Northeast region. I have nothing to worry about. Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the top of the grand staircase. The room went silent. The music stopped. A microphone screeched slightly as Arthur Sterling stepped to the podium at the bottom of the stairs. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur announced, his voice booming. Employees of Vanguard Global. It is my distinct honor to finally introduce you to the majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board. The woman who saved this company from bankruptcy 5 years ago and has been guiding us silently ever since. Mark squeezed Jessica's hand. Here we go. Watch me work the room after this. Please welcome, Arthur continued, gesturing to the top of the stairs, Ms. Ella Vance. The double doors at the top of the balcony swung open. Mark froze. He stopped breathing. Standing there, bathed in the spotlight, was a woman in a custom-made, emerald green velvet gown that hugged every curve. She wore a diamond necklace that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. Her hair was down, cascading in luscious waves, and her glasses were gone, revealing piercing, confident eyes. It was Ella. But not the Ella who served meatloaf. Not the Ella who cleaned his apartment. This was a queen looking down at her subjects. No, Mark whispered, the blood draining from his face. That's impossible. Jessica squinted. Is that your wife? The dishwasher? Ella began to descend the stairs. Every step was deliberate. The crowd erupted in polite applause, but Mark couldn't move. His knees felt like jelly. She reached the bottom of the stairs and took the microphone from Arthur. Her voice was smooth, amplified through the speakers filling the room. Good evening, she said. Thank you all for coming. For years I have watched this company from the shadows. I wanted to see who really worked for the good of Vanguard, and who worked only for themselves. I wanted to see how my employees treated the little people, the assistants, the janitors, the waitresses. Her eyes scanned the room. Mark felt like a laser sight was locked onto his forehead. Because how you treat those you think are beneath you, Ella said, her voice turning icy, tells me everything I need to know about your character. She began to walk through the crowd. The sea of people parted for her. She was walking straight toward Mark. Oh my God, she's coming here, Jessica squeaked, trying to hide behind Mark. Ella stopped 3 feet away from them. The entire room went silent, sensing the tension. Hello, Mark, Ella said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Ella, Mark choked out. You own Vanguard? I do, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And I have to say, your performance review is not looking good. The silence in the Pierre Hotel ballroom was heavy, pressing down on Mark Reynolds like a physical weight. 300 of New York's elite CEOs, tech moguls, venture capitalists were watching him. Mark's brain was misfiring. He looked at the woman in the emerald gown. It was Ella. It had to be. But the posture, the cold amusement in her eyes, the sheer aura of power. It was alien. Ella, Mark whispered, his voice cracking. He tried to step into her personal space, relying on the intimacy of 3 years of marriage. Honey, what is this? Is this a prank? You're a waitress. Ella didn't step back. She simply held her ground, forcing him to stop. I was a waitress, Mark. For a few hours a day. It kept me grounded. It reminded me what it was like to work for a living, something you seem to have forgotten in your quest to climb the corporate ladder by stepping on people's necks. Jessica, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to pull her hand away from Mark's arm, but Mark clamped down, needing the support. I don't understand, Mark stammered, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. You own Vanguard? Since when? Since before I met you, Ella said. her voice amplified slightly by the acoustics of the room, ensuring the board of directors heard every word. My father was Alexander Vance. When he passed, he left the majority share to me. But I didn't want to run a company I didn't understand, so I worked in every department: mailroom, logistics, customer service, and yes, I took a job at a diner to stay humble while I watched my executives from afar. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. I wanted to see who was loyal. I wanted to see who had integrity. And when I married you, Mark, I thought I had found a decent man, a hard worker. I am, Mark blurted out, seizing the opening. I am a hard worker, Ella. Look at my sales figures. I did it all for us, for our future. He tried to smile, that charming salesman smile that usually worked. Look, baby, I know things have been rough. The stress, it got to me. And this. He gestured vaguely at Jessica, who looked ready to vomit. This is just a misunderstanding. A lapse in judgment. Now that I know the truth, now that I know you're the chairwoman, we can be unstoppable. You and me. Reynolds and Vance. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the crowd. Someone near the buffet whispered, "Is he serious?" Ella laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You think this is about a lapse in judgment? Ella asked. She turned to the crowd, addressing the room. This man, my husband, came home yesterday and told me I wasn't corporate material. He told me I smelled like grease. He told me I would embarrass him at this very gala. She turned back to Mark, her eyes flashing. Do I embarrass you now, Mark? Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. And you? Ella shifted her gaze to Jessica. The blonde intern shrank back. Jessica Thorne, junior assistant. I see you're wearing the limited edition Chanel earrings Mark bought on the company credit card last month. Expense report number 4092. Listed as client gifts, I believe. Jessica's hand flew to her ears. The crowd gasped. That's not true, Jessica squeaked. He told me he bought them with his bonus. Mark didn't get a bonus this quarter, Ella said smoothly, because his department missed the efficiency targets. Targets that were missed because the senior manager was spending 3 hours a day at long lunches with his intern. Arthur Sterling, the CEO, stepped up beside Ella, holding a tablet. Shall I call security, Ms. Vance? Mark panicked. He realized the power couple angle wasn't working. He switched to aggression. You can't do this, Ella, Mark hissed. We are married. That means half of everything is mine. New York is an equitable distribution state. If you own Vanguard, I own half of your shares. You want to humiliate me? Fine. I'll take you to court and strip this company to the bone. The room went deadly silent again. Mark felt a surge of triumph. He had the leverage. He had the ring. Ella smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching a mouse run into a trap. Oh, Mark, she said, shaking her head with pity. You really should read what you sign. Mark froze. What? The papers you threw at me yesterday. The ones you made me sign on the kitchen table while your mistress laughed at me, Ella said. Did you read the addendum on page 12? It was a standard separation agreement. I downloaded it from LegalZoom, Mark shouted. No, Ella corrected. You thought it was. But I switched the papers while you were popping that bottle of champagne to celebrate kicking me out. Mark's face went pale white. You signed a postnuptial agreement and an uncontested divorce settlement waiving all rights to my assets, my earnings, and my company in exchange for a lump sum payment. Ella explained calmly. You valued me at $5,000, Mark. Remember, you wrote the check. She reached into her small clutch purse and pulled out the folded document, holding it up like a trophy. You signed away your claim to $1 billion fortune because you were too busy staring at Jessica's legs to read the fine print. The laughter in the room wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was raucous. The titans of industry were laughing at him. Security, Ella said, turning her back on him. Remove Mr. Reynolds and Miss Thorne. They are trespassing. No, Ella, wait! Mark lunged forward, but 2 massive guards in black suits intercepted him. One grabbed him by the collar of his rented tuxedo, dragging him backward. Jessica didn't even wait to be grabbed. She bolted for the exit, leaving Mark struggling in the grip of the guards. I'll sue you! Mark screamed as he was dragged across the marble floor. I made this company! You can't fire me! I'm the senior account manager. Ella didn't even look back. She took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, raised it to the board of directors, and took a sip. Now, she said to the room, let's discuss the Q4 projections. Monday morning, 8 a.m., Vanguard Global Headquarters, Wall Street. Mark Reynolds had not slept. He had spent the last 36 hours in a cheap motel because the locks on the apartment had already been changed. When he tried to use his key, a voice from the Ring doorbell, Arthur Sterling's voice, informed him that his personal effects had been donated to charity. He stood in front of the Vanguard skyscraper, wearing the same suit he had worn on Friday. He looked disheveled, unshaven, and manic. It's not over, he muttered to himself. I still have my job. Labor laws protect me. She can't just fire me for a personal vendetta. I have rights. He marched into the lobby. He approached the turnstiles and slapped his ID badge against the reader. Beep, beep. Access denied. He tried again. Beep, beep. Hey, you! Mark yelled at the security desk. It was heavyset guard named Frank, who Mark had ignored every morning for 5 years. Frank, fix the damn machine. Frank looked up slowly. He was chewing gum. Badge is dead, Mr. Reynolds. It's a glitch. Let me in. I have a 9 a.m. meeting. You have a 9 a.m. meeting, all right, Frank said, pressing a button under the desk. But you need an escort. 2 men in gray suits emerged from the elevators. They didn't look like regular security. They looked like feds. Mark Reynolds? One of them asked. Yes. Who are you? I'm Agent Miller from the Kroll Corporate Investigations Unit, and this is Mr. Henderson from the forensic accounting firm Deloitte. We'd like you to come upstairs. Mark felt a knot of cold fear in his stomach. Kroll, Deloitte, those weren't the people who handled simple firings. Those were the people who handled crimes. I want my lawyer, Mark stammered. You can call him after the exit interview, Agent Miller said. Move. They escorted him not to his office, but to the top-floor boardroom, the inner sanctum he had always dreamed of entering. Ella was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. She was wearing a sharp white power suit, looking every inch the billionaire CEO. On her right sat Arthur Sterling. On her left was a stack of files thick enough to be a phone book. Mark was shoved into a chair at the opposite end of the table. Morning, Mark, Ella said cheerfully. Did you find a place to stay? I hear the rental market in Queens is tough right now. Cut the crap, Ella, Mark snapped, trying to regain some dignity. You can't do this. I'm contacting HR. This is a hostile work environment. This isn't a work environment anymore, Mark, Arthur Sterling said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. This is a crime scene. Mark looked at the paper. It was a termination letter. Reason, gross misconduct, embezzlement, and corporate fraud. Embezzlement? Mark laughed nervously. You're crazy. I expense a few dinners. Everyone does it. Ella opened the file in front of her. We had Kroll run a deep dive into your accounts over the weekend, Mark. It's amazing what you find when you look. It wasn't just dinners. She pulled out a photo. The business trip to Cabo San Lucas in 2023? There was no client there, just you and a Ms. Jessica Thorne. Cost to company, $12,000. She pulled out another document. The consulting fees paid to a shell company called Reynolds Solutions? $50,000 over 2 years, funneled directly into an offshore account in the Caymans. Mark's mouth went dry. He had thought he was so clever with that one. And my personal favorite, Ella said, holding up a receipt. The diamond necklace you bought for my birthday 2 years ago? You expensed it as office supplies. You bought your wife a gift with the company's money and then claimed it was toner cartridges. It was a mistake, Mark whispered. It's grand larceny. The man from Deloitte interjected. We've already handed the evidence to the district attorney. The NYPD is waiting in the lobby. Mark stood up, knocking his chair over. Jail! You're sending me to jail! Ella, please! I'm your husband! Ex-husband, Ella corrected. And I'm not sending you to jail, Mark. You sent yourself there. I'm just providing the Uber. She pressed the button on the intercom. "Send them in." The doors opened, and two uniformed NYPD officers stepped in. One of them held a pair of handcuffs. Mark looked at Ella, his eyes wide with terror. The arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. All that was left was a scared little man. "Ella, please," he begged, tears welling up. "I'll do anything. I'll apologize. I'll leave New York. Don't ruin my life." Ella stood up and walked the length of the table until she was standing right in front of him. She leaned in close, so only he could hear. "You ruined your own life, Mark," she whispered. "You had a loyal wife who would have walked through fire for you. You had a good job. You had a home. But it wasn't enough. You wanted the billionaire lifestyle? Well, congratulations. You're getting the billionaire treatment, high-profile legal action." She nodded to the officers. "Get him out of my building." "Ella! Ella!" Mark screamed as the officers cuffed him and dragged him out of the boardroom. The doors slammed shut. Silence returned to the room. Arthur Sterling looked at Ella. She was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally letting go of 3 years of suppression. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Arthur asked gently. Ella took a deep breath, smoothing her white suit. She walked to the window and looked out over the Manhattan skyline. "I'm fine, Arthur," she said. "Better than fine." "Is Jessica Thorne's termination processed?" "Yes. She was escorted out 20 minutes ago. She's currently in the lobby, crying and trying to call Mark, but, well, Mark is indisposed." Ella nodded. "Good. Now, call the legal department. I want to make sure the press release goes out within the hour. Vanguard Global cracks down on internal corruption. Spin it as a victory for transparency." "Brilliant, ma'am." Ella looked at her reflection in the glass. The waitress was gone. The victim was gone. But the story wasn't over yet. Mark was desperate. And desperate men did dangerous things, even from behind bars. 3 days later, New York criminal court. The gavel banged down hard, echoing through the courtroom. "Bail is set at $500,000, Judge Harrison announced, looking over his spectacles at Mark Reynolds. Mark stood in an orange jumpsuit, looking like a shadow of the man who had strutted into the Pierre Hotel just days ago. Sitting in the gallery were Mark's parents, 2 retired schoolteachers from Ohio who looked terrified. They had leveraged their retirement home and their life savings to pay the bond agent. Mark didn't even look at them. His mind was racing with only one thought: revenge. As he walked out of the precinct, the paparazzi were waiting. Flashbulbs blinded him. Questions were shouted. "Mark, did you steal the money? Is it true your wife is the billionaire owner? Do you have anything to say to Ella Vance?" Mark shoved past them, ducking into his parents' beat-up sedan. As they drove away, his mother sobbed in the front seat. "Mark, honey, we can get you a lawyer. We can plead insanity. The stress." "Shut up, Mom," Mark snapped, his eyes glued to his phone, a burner he had bought with cash the moment he was released. "I'm not pleading anything. I'm going to win." Mark knew something Ella didn't. He knew that while he was sloppy with the expense reports, he was a genius with data. 3 months ago, during a system migration, Mark had stumbled upon a vulnerability in Vanguard's server. He had downloaded a cache of files labeled Project Horizon, highly sensitive blueprints for Vanguard's next-generation tech merger. He hadn't used them then, but he would use them now. He dialed a number he had memorized from a business card he'd picked up at a networking event years ago. "Victor Cray," a gravelly voice answered. Victor Cray was a corporate raider, a man known in Wall Street circles as the Vulture. He bought distressed companies, fired everyone, sold the assets, and kept the profit. He was Vanguard Global's sworn enemy. "Mr. Cray," Mark said, his voice trembling with adrenaline, "this is Mark Reynolds. I believe you've been watching the news." "The husband," Cray chuckled darkly. "The man of the hour. You've got guts calling me Reynolds. Or you're stupid." "I have, Project Horizon," Mark said. Silence on the line. Then Cray's voice shifted. It was no longer mocking. It was hungry. "That's a myth. Vanguard has been developing that tech for 5 years. It's encrypted. I have the raw data, the schematics, the client list. Everything. Mark lied smoothly. He had most of it, enough to damage them, even if he didn't have it all. I want $5 million in crypto and a flight to a non-extradition country. Tonight. Meet me at the rusted shipping yard in Red Hook. Midnight, Cray said. Come alone. If you're lying, Reynolds, the police will be the least of your worries. Mark hung up. He looked at his parents. Stop the car. I'm getting out here. Mark, you can't leave. You're on bail, his father shouted. Mark opened the door while the car was still moving slowly in traffic, rolled out, and disappeared into the subway entrance. He had one night to destroy Ella's empire. Midnight. Red Hook shipping yards. The fog rolled off the East River, thick and cold. Mark shivered in his windbreaker. He held a small, black USB drive tightly in his hand. It contained the stolen data. A black SUV with no lights rolled silently toward him. The window rolled down. Victor Cray sat in the back, smoking a cigar. He looked like a shark in a suit. Get in, Cray commanded. Mark hesitated, then climbed in. 2 large bodyguards sat in the front. Show me, Cray said, extending a hand. Mark pulled out a laptop from his backpack, plugged in the drive, and brought up the files. Cray leaned in, his eyes scanning the documents. Incredible, Cray whispered. This is the source code for their AI logistics platform. With this, I can clone their system. I can undercut Vanguard's prices by 40%. Their stock will tank within a week. Ella Vance will be bankrupt. Do we have a deal? Mark asked, sweating. 5 million. Bitcoin. Cray laughed. You're a traitor, Reynolds. You betrayed your wife, your company, and now the law. I like that. Cray pulled out his phone and tapped a few buttons. Transfer initiating. But first, I need the decryption key for the final folder. Money first, Mark said, trying to sound tough. Cray nodded to the bodyguard. The bodyguard pulled out a gun and pointed it at Mark's knee. Key! Now, Cray said boredly. Mark panicked. Okay, it's Vance, 1998. Cray typed it in. The folder opened. He smiled. Pleasure doing business with you, Mark. Oh, and about the money? I lied. Mark's eyes widened. What? I don't pay rats, Cray sneered. Boys, throw him out. The door opened, and Mark was shoved out onto the wet pavement. He scrambled up, furious. You can't do this! I'll go to the feds! I'll tell them you stole it! And tell them you stole it first? Cray laughed. Goodbye, Mr. Reynolds. The SUV sped off into the night. Mark was left alone, penniless, and a fugitive. He fell to his knees, screaming into the darkness. He had lost everything. Suddenly, floodlights blinded him. Wham, wham. Red and blue lights erupted from every corner of the shipping yard. Sirens wailed. A helicopter roared overhead, its spotlight pinning Mark to the ground. Federal agents, drop to your knees. Mark froze. He looked around wildly. From behind a shipping container, a figure emerged. She was flanked by the FBI and Arthur Sterling. It was Ella. She was wearing a trench coat, looking calm and collected. Mark stared at her, confused. Ella? How? She walked up to him, stopping just outside the police perimeter. Did you really think I didn't know you downloaded those files 3 months ago, Mark? She asked, her voice cutting through the noise of the sirens. I track every keystroke on the executive servers. But Cray has the files. He's going to destroy you, Mark yelled, trying to find a victory in his defeat. He has the source code. Ella smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. He has a source code, Ella corrected. I knew you were a risk, Mark. So I planted a canary trap. The files you downloaded? They're fake. They contain a logic bomb. As soon as Cray uploads that code to his servers, it will erase his own company's database and ping the FBI with his location and IP address for possession of stolen property. Mark's jaw dropped. You set me up? I gave you a rope, Mark, Ella said softly. You chose to hang yourself with it. You just committed industrial espionage and sold fake secrets to a corporate terrorist. That's 20 years in federal prison, no bail. She signaled the agents. He's all yours." The trial of Mark Reynolds did not begin with a bang. It began with the slow, suffocating grind of the federal justice system. 6 months had passed since the night at the Red Hook shipping yards. 6 months of Mark sitting in a holding cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, a concrete fortress that smelled of bleach and despair. His bail had been revoked immediately after the FBI found the burner phone he'd used to contact Victor Cray. Mark had lost 30 pounds. The expensive suits that used to define his silhouette now hung off him like oversized costumes. His hair, once gelled to perfection, was thinning and gray at the temples. But his eyes were still bright, feverishly bright. He still believed, in the twisted labyrinth of his narcissism, that he could talk his way out of this. He sat at the defense table, his hands shackled to his waist, until the bailiff released them for the proceedings. His lawyer was a court-appointed public defender named Sarah Jenkins. She was overworked, underpaid, and had told Mark on day one to plead guilty. He had fired her 3 times. The judge had reinstated her 3 times. "Mr. Reynolds," Jenkins whispered, shuffling through a mountain of paperwork. "Please, do not look at the gallery. Do not make faces. Just sit there." Mark ignored her. He turned slightly. The courtroom was packed. It was the white-collar trial of the decade. Every business blog, every financial news channel, and every gossip columnist in New York was there. They wanted to see the fall of the man who tried to sell out his own wife. And there she was. Ella Vance sat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor. She wasn't wearing the flashy emerald gown from the gala. She was wearing a simple, severe navy suit. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like a statue carved from ice. Beside her sat Arthur Sterling, looking like her protective gargoyle. Ella didn't look at Mark. She looked straight ahead at the empty witness stand. Her indifference burned him more than hatred ever could. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Marcus Thorne swept in. He was a man known for his distaste for corporate greed. He looked at Mark with the same expression one might reserve for a cockroach on a kitchen counter. "Docket number 40,922, the judge intoned. "The United States versus Mark Reynolds. Charges of industrial espionage, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. Is the prosecution ready?" Assistant U.S. Attorney David Ross stood up. He was a shark in a pinstripe suit. "Ready, Your Honor." Opening statements. Ross walked to the jury box. He didn't shout. He spoke in a conversational, almost friendly tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, greed is a common human emotion. We all want more." But Mark Reynolds didn't just want more. He wanted everything. And he wanted to destroy the person who gave him the most. Ross pointed a finger at Mark. "You will hear evidence that this man, angry that his wife was more successful than him, stole what he believed were proprietary secrets worth billions. You will hear that he contacted a known corporate raider. You will hear that he sold these secrets for $5 million. The fact that the secrets were fake, a trap laid by a brilliant CEO protecting her company, does not make his crime any less real. It just makes him a failure as a criminal, as well as a husband." Mark bristled. Jenkins kicked him under the table. The first 3 days of the trial were a bloodbath. The prosecution laid out the forensic digital trail. They showed the jury the logs of Mark downloading the files. They played the audio recording of his call to Victor Cray. But the real drama began on day 4, when the prosecution called their star witness. The people called Jessica Thorne. A ripple of whispers went through the gallery. The double doors opened, and Jessica walked in. She looked nothing like the confident mistress in the red dress. She was wearing a beige cardigan and slacks. She looked tired. She had taken a plea deal, 2 years of probation in exchange for full cooperation. She took the stand, avoiding Mark's gaze. "Miss Thorne," Ross asked, "what was your relationship with the defendant?" "We were involved," Jessica said quietly. "He was my superior at Vanguard." "And did Mr. Reynolds ever discuss his wife, Ella Vance, with you?" Jessica nodded, wiping a tear. "Yes, constantly. He despised her." "Objection!" Mark shouted, standing up. "I never said I despised her. I said she was holding me back." "Sit down, Mr. Reynolds," Judge Thorne barked, banging his gavel. "One more outburst, and I will have you gagged." Mark sank back down, breathing heavily. "Continue, Miss Thorne," Ross said. "He called her a nobody." Jessica sobbed. "He used to laugh about how she waited tables while he ran the world. He told me he was going to divorce her as soon as he got his promotion so he wouldn't have to share his bonus. When he found out she was the owner, he didn't feel sorry. He felt robbed. He told me in the motel room that he was going to burn her kingdom to the ground. He said if he couldn't have Vanguard, nobody could." The jury looked at Mark with open disgust. The image of the charming executive was gone. Revealed was a petty, vindictive man. If Jessica's testimony was damaging, the next witness was fatal. Victor Cray did not appear in person. He was currently in federal custody in a different state, awaiting his own trial for the purchase of stolen goods. He appeared via a high-definition video link on a massive screen in the courtroom. Cray looked bored. He wore an orange jumpsuit, but he still had the arrogance of a billionaire. "Mr. Cray," Ross asked, "did the defendant approach you?" "He called me." Cray's voice boomed through the speakers, sounded desperate, like a rat trapped in a corner. "Did he offer you Project Horizon?" "He did. He claimed he had the keys to the castle. I offered him $5 million. "Did you intend to pay him?" Cray laughed, a harsh, metallic sound. "God, no. The man was an amateur. You don't pay amateurs, you use them and discard them. I was going to take the drive and leave him in the shipping yard. Honestly, I did him a favor. If the FBI hadn't shown up, my security team might have resolved the loose end." Mark turned pale. He realized for the first time that night in Red Hook, he hadn't just been risking jail. He had been risking his life. And Ella, by calling the FBI, had actually saved him from a shallow grave. He looked at Ella. She was taking notes on a yellow legal pad, completely ignoring the screen. On the seventh day, against the screaming advice of his lawyer, Mark Reynolds demanded to take the stand. It is a cardinal rule of defense. Never let a narcissist testify. They think they can outsmart the prosecutor. They never can. Mark walked to the stand, adjusting his tie. He believed he could charm the jury. He believed he could explain that he was the victim of a cruel, manipulative billionaire. "Mr. Reynolds," his lawyer asked wearily, "why did you take the files?" "I didn't steal them," Mark said, his voice smooth, practicing the speech he had rehearsed in his cell. "I was conducting an internal security audit. I suspected there were vulnerabilities in the system. I downloaded the files to prove that the system was unsafe. I contacted Mr. Cray to see if he would buy them, simply to prove that corporate espionage was possible. It was a white-hat operation. I was trying to protect the company." The jury looked skeptical. "And the $5 million?" Jenkins asked. "A consulting fee." Mark lied. "For my services." "Thank you." Jenkins sat down, putting her head in her hands. David Ross stood up for cross-examination. He didn't bring any papers. He just walked up to the stand and leaned on the railing. "Mr. Reynolds, you claim you were protecting the company?" "Yes." "The company owned by your wife?" "Yes." "The wife you divorced 3 days prior?" "It was a difficult time, but I still cared about Vanguard." Ross smiled. "You cared about Vanguard. Interesting. Let's look at Exhibit D." A screen flashed up. It was a text message log recovered from Mark's phone, sent to Jessica Thorne 2 hours before the meeting with Cray. Ross read it aloud. "Baby, get the passports ready. Once I sell this to the Vulture, Vanguard is dead. Ella will be destitute. We'll be drinking margaritas in Rio while she's filing for bankruptcy. Revenge is sweet." The courtroom went silent. Ross looked at Mark. "Is that the text message of a man conducting a security audit, Mr. Reynolds?" Mark stammered. I was venting. It was out of context." "Out of context?" Ross raised his voice for the first time. "You explicitly stated your intent to bankrupt the company and leave your ex-wife destitute." "You weren't a whistleblower, Mr. Reynolds. You were a disgruntled employee with a god complex who got outplayed by a woman smarter than him." "She tricked me," Mark screamed, losing his composure. He stood up in the witness box, pointing a shaking finger at Ella. "She set me up." She knew I would take the bait. She's the criminal. She lied to me for 3 years. She pretended to be a nobody. That's fraud. Marriage fraud. Mr. Reynolds, sit down, the judge yelled. She's a witch. Mark was frothing at the mouth now. The mask completely slipped. Look at her, sitting there like she's royalty. I made her. I supported her while she played waitress. I deserve half of that company. I deserve it all. Bailiff, restrain the witness. 2 marshals grabbed Mark as he tried to lunge over the railing toward the prosecution table. He was hauled back, kicking and screaming, while the jury watched in horrified fascination. Ella hadn't flinched. She simply removed her reading glasses, cleaned them with a silk cloth, and put them back on. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. It would have been 20, but they ordered lunch first. When they returned, Mark was sitting at the table, heavily sedated but awake. He looked small. In the matter of the United States versus Mark Reynolds, the jury foreman announced, on the charge of conspiracy to commit grand larceny, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, guilty. On the charge of industrial espionage, guilty. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The words hit Mark like physical blows. Judge Thorne leaned forward. Mark Reynolds, you have shown absolutely no remorse. You have wasted this court's time. You have attempted to destroy a pillar of the American economy for petty personal grievances. I see no reason for leniency. The judge took off his glasses. I sentence you to 15 years in a federal correctional institution. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $2 million to Vanguard Global for the cost of the investigation and legal fees. Sentence is imposed immediately. Remand to custody. The gavel came down with a finality that shook Mark's bones. 15 years. He would be 50 years old when he got out. His life was over. The marshals pulled Mark to his feet. He was too weak to fight now. He shuffled toward the side door that led to the transport vans. As he reached the gate, he stopped. He looked back one last time. Ella was gathering her things. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. For a brief second, their eyes met across the courtroom. Mark expected to see triumph. He expected to see her gloating. He wanted her to be angry, because anger meant he still mattered to her. But there was nothing. No anger. No joy. No pity. Her eyes were completely empty of him. He was a spreadsheet error she had corrected, a glitch she had patched. She turned her back on him and walked toward the exit. Ella, he whispered, but the sound died in his throat. The door slammed shut behind him. Outside, the steps of the courthouse were a zoo. Microphones were thrust into Ella's face as she descended the stairs, flanked by Arthur Sterling and a team of security. Ms. Vance, how do you feel? Are you happy with the verdict? Ms. Vance, do you have a comment on your ex-husband's sentence? Ella stopped on the bottom step. The cameras clicked furiously. She looked immaculate, the sun catching the diamond pin on her lapel, the Vanguard logo. She stepped to the cluster of microphones. The crowd hushed. Justice was served today, Ella said, her voice clear and steady. Vanguard Global is a company built on integrity. We protect our assets, and more importantly, we protect our people. Today sends a message. No one is above the consequences of their actions. Not even family. Ms. Vance, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal shouted, you hid your identity for years. Do you regret it? If you had told him sooner, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Ella paused. She looked at the reporter with a small, sad smile. I hid my identity to find someone who loved me for me, not for what I owned, she said. If I had told him sooner, he wouldn't have been a better man. He just would have been a richer monster. I regret nothing. She turned and walked toward the waiting black limousine. Arthur Sterling held the door open for her. To the airport, ma'am? Arthur asked. Yes, Arthur, Ella said, sliding into the leather seat. We have a merger to announce in Tokyo. And Mr. Reynolds? Arthur asked quietly, before closing the door. Ella looked out the window at the heavy iron bars of the transport van pulling away from the side of the courthouse. Who? She asked. Arthur smiled. Exactly, ma'am. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud. The limousine pulled away. merging effortlessly into the stream of New York traffic, moving forward, always forward. Behind them, the transport van turned left, toward the highway, and toward a concrete cage where Mark Reynolds would have 15 long years to think about the meatloaf he had complained about and the woman he had underestimated. Wow! 15 years. That is what happens when you try to play 4D chess against a woman who owns the board. Mark Reynolds thought he was the main character, but he was just a glitch in Ella's system. It's a brutal lesson. Be careful who you step on your way up, because you might meet them on your way down, and they might just be the ones holding the safety net, or cutting it. What did you guys think of Ella's canary trap? Was it genius, or was it too cruel? I personally think Mark got exactly what he ordered. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of revenge, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button right now. It helps the channel grow so I can bring you more crazy stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon. Comment, Team Ella, below if you're on her side. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.